Good evening, everyone. My name is Hariesh Manaadiar. I'm from Shipping and Freight Resource. It's a online resource for shipping and freight knowledge, information, and also marketing solutions for the freight industry. Today, I'm here to talk about shipper-owned containers and a brief about what it is, what it entails, who can use it, when you will be using it, and certain other items that are required for the handling of shipper-owned containers. SOC is the most common abbreviation that is used for shipper-owned containers, and that's obviously stands for shipper-owned containers. Now, many people might ask, why would a shipper own containers? Generally, in container business, the containers are owned by the shipping lines, also known as carriers. Now, carriers were in today's climate, there's close to 24 million TEUs circulating around the world across various trade lanes, and majority of that is owned by the shipping lines who operate these in various trade lanes as they circle around the globe. But so when the carrier is owning and operating the container, it is called a carrier-owned container. But when it is owned by a shipper, it is called a shipper-owned container. Now, the term shipper could have various meanings because, for example, for a shipping line, a BCO or a beneficial cargo owner, like a John Deere or a Cisco, could be a shipper. But to these same carriers, freight forwarders or NVOCC operators can also be shippers, because for them it doesn't matter who's shipping the cargo. And so NVOCC operators and freight forwarders also sometimes own containers, and sometimes also the shippers. So that is why it is called shipper's own container. Now, some of the terminologies that you might come across in handling shipper-owned containers are SOC, as I mentioned, and also the carriers sometimes require the owner of the container to provide certification, ACEP certification, which is a certification that is required for the continuous inspection of the container. ACEP stands for Approved Continuous Examination Program, which means the container has to be certified at regular intervals, must be examined, must be inspected, must be fit for the sea transport. It must be seaworthy in all respects. And so the shipping line, if you're a shipper and if you want to ship your own container with a shipping line, they will ask you to provide this ACEP certificate, and also the CSC plate, which is the container safety certificate, container safety convention certificate, that must be on the container, and it must be valid at all times. So these are two important factors that the shipping lines will look for when they're accepting a shipper-owned container. Now, shipper-owned containers can be used at various stages, but a lot of the shippers use shipper-owned containers because for shipments like a project cargo. So, for example, if some country is building a power project in a remote area within the country, and they want to bring in goods, each time they bring in goods in a container, they might not be able to unpack the container at the same time and use all the cargo. And in that sense, they cannot keep the container with them because it will incur demurrage and detention, which is one of the most expensive charges for a shipper, levied by the container shipping line. Container shipping lines charge demurrage and detention because, like any movable asset, the container generates revenue only if it is continuously moving. If it is not moving and it is stagnant in some place, it's just not generating enough revenue for them. And even for a container shipping line, not all containers are owned by them. They also lease containers from other people. So they may be paying rent on that, they may be paying hire for that, or they may be paying interest on the container purchases. So they need to recoup that cost, and that is why they charge demurrage and detention. So, for example, if there's a project happening in Central Asia, for example, and a lot of containers are required, 150, 200 containers worth of cargo, and for this many containers to go there and sit for months on end and waiting for it to be unpacked, it will be very expensive for the customer. Therefore, customers, the project customers like ABB or Siemens or any of those multinationals, they buy containers. They prefer to buy containers for their own use. And after the container, after the purpose of the container has been served, they then sell those containers in the market, or they can scrap it. So those are some real life examples where shipper-owned containers may be used. And in terms of other uses also, in there are some drawbacks as well, because a container is not cheap. A 20-foot container can cost even $2,000, $2,500, and a 40-foot container can cost up to $4,500. So that is quite an investment for a shipper if he wants to buy a container, and not just buy a container. He has to maintain the container. He has to make sure that the container is safe and secure to use at all times. And sometimes when the container goes to a foreign destination and it doesn't come back in time, he does not have the other container to use, and he doesn't have the use of the container that he's already purchased. So those are some drawbacks that shipper-owned shippers can face if they're using shipper-owned container. But at the same time, if you are a NVOCC like Kuehne+Nagel, for example, or an Expeditors, or now recently Amazon, so it makes sense for these kind of multinational companies to buy containers and use them, because they can keep it circulating, they can keep it moving from whichever parts of the world it is sent to. So for that, for those kind of customers, shipper-owned container is a good option. And in terms of extra processes for using shipper-owned containers, yes, there will be some extra processes, as I mentioned, because the shipping line has to be convinced that the containers that are used are cargo-worthy and seaworthy, and all the fittings on the container are strong enough to withstand the multiple handling that might happen. So they need to make sure that these containers that are used are in good condition. So for that, they might also ask for inspection certificates. They might ask for additional documents to prove ownership of the containers. And also, shipper-owned containers, the markings on the shipper-owned container must also be changed, because sometimes shippers buy containers from third-party people, or maybe some of the old containers from shipping lines. So for example, if you buy a container from MSC, the container number might read MSCU, which is the prefix that is used by MSC. But if you are buying it as a shipper for your own use, you have to change the ownership prefix of that container, because you cannot use it as an MSCU, because it does not belong to MSCU. And remember, the container prefix is so those processes followed for shipper-owned containers. And some people have asked, how does one source shipper-owned containers? Well, there are many ways to source containers. You can buy it directly from manufacturers, but obviously they are used to selling in bigger lots to shipping lines mainly, and not to customers who want one or two containers. Then there are as I just mentioned, there are the second-hand container dealers who buy containers from shipping lines or from leasing companies, and they refurbish those containers and recondition and sell it almost like brand new to other customers. So you can source like that. Then there are also, you could lease containers for a period of time from leasing companies and make it your own for that period and use that as shipper-owned containers. But there are also other options like container exchange, for example, who have the flexibility, who offer the flexibility to the customers to either buy or lease or sell containers through their online platform. And that is also a very good way to identify containers, the availability of containers, where it is, and then choose from those areas to either buy or sell. So there are multiple options for customers to source SOCs, and there are also big differences in the markings of the container. So as I mentioned earlier, some of the markings will definitely change on the container number, the ownership, the name of the owner of the container, the container prefix, the check digit, the CRC approval, all of that will change in an SOC container.